Rizvi to present the Muharram lecture for tonight. Then we will have Matam, a few announcements, and close with Ziyarat. Now, let's welcome Syed Mansoor Ali Rizvi to present the Muharram lecture with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad
محمد
wa
وآل
ali
محمد.
Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah. The most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise belongs to Him. When He creates, is not created. One who sees is unseen. The one who gives and takes life is ever living. And the one who gave us the best example for us to follow, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا أعبد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. This short chapter of the Quran that I just recited, it's one of the shorter chapters. It is the 109th chapter. It's called Al-Kafirun, translated as the disbelievers, the deniers. The translation is as follows. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Say, O you who disbelieve, I worship not what you worship, nor worship you who I worship, nor will you worship, nor shall I worship what you worship, nor will you worship who I worship. You have your religion, and I have my religion. The background of the chapter, according to some commentators, is that some of the members of the Quraysh had gone up to the Prophet and said, hey, look, why don't you, after the Prophet was spreading his message, announced who he was, message of Tawheed. And so a couple of the people of Quraysh said, why don't we do this? One year we worship like you, another year you can worship like us. And so according to some commentators, this chapter was revealed. Now I want people to think a little bit about some of the points of this chapter. At the very end, saying you have your religion, I have my religion. And this is one of the universal themes of Islam, in that there is no compulsion in religion. However, there is an important point that a boundary is being established here. That while other religions and other ideologies, there's no compulsion, and there should be a certain respect given to the practitioners or other followers of those religions. It doesn't mean that we have license to change our own theology because of what others may say or others what may pressure us to do. And so this brings me to the topic of boundaries. And we have boundaries in all different aspects of life. And I want to give an example. I want people to think about this for a moment. You have somebody who's working in a typical 9-to-5 position. And they're doing the best of the job. A lot of times the supervisor asks them to do extra time, but not receiving any compensation for if they're salaried. They are dealing with the stress at work, not being treated as best as they should be treated. They come home, they deal with a combative spouse, combative family members. Then on top of that, they deal with friends who call at very inconvenient times, ranting about things. And when that person needs to get assistance. When that same person wants to call get assistance, that person is nowhere to be found. So in these examples, what we see are issues of boundaries. The essence of boundaries is the essence of boundaries is one where, and I apologize for small interruption. Some of Sister Amina, some of the people are trying to get into having some technical difficulty. So if you could please, whoever is watching this, could you please tend to that. Sallallahu Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
My apologies for that slight interruption. So my topic is about boundaries and the importance of boundaries. We see, for example, in the example of the Prophet, that he maintained a boundary where, while respecting and acknowledging another person's beliefs, did not allow other beliefs to be dictated to him. We see an example of Imam Hussein when it came to the issue of what Yazid wanted. This is an example of a boundary. Yazid basically gave no choice to Imam Hussein. He said, either you give me allegiance or your head. And Imam Hussein was willing to do other things. Imam Hussein was willing to leave the Arabian Peninsula. Sometimes he was willing to go to Yemen, willing to go to India and other places. But there's one thing he would not compromise on, that was giving allegiance to Yazid. Because Yazid wanted his allegiance because it would help establish legitimacy in the eyes of other people by having the allegiance of the grandson of the Prophet. And so we have to be on guard about this concept of boundaries. Simply put, boundaries are such that we don't allow ourselves to be dictated or controlled by others. But at the same time, we don't do the same to others as well. So it works both ways. It's rather more like setting filters and limits, because every person has a limit. In our religion and interactions, we have limits as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated limits and boundaries. What are the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated? These are what we call the wajib and the haram. The wajib are those things that He has mandated as a boundary we do. The haram is a boundary that He's mandated that we stay away from. Now, the essence of getting closer to Allah is higher than this. So to give you an analogy, imagine we all, for those of you who understand the rules of basketball, imagine playing the game of basketball. Now, the idea in this game of basketball is to score as many baskets as you can. Now, imagine somebody playing basketball where they're only concerned about double dribbling, they're only concerned about stepping out of bounds, they're only concerned about fouling somebody. Would they be playing the game technically correct? The answer is yes. They'd be missing the whole point of the game, to score as many baskets as you can. Islam is the same way when it comes to getting closer to Allah. But there are certain boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated. And so we should be at a level where we don't ignore those particular boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated for us. Sallallahu Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now, there are boundaries that we can put on ourselves. For example, when it comes to food, we can mandate, and we're going beyond the halal, haram, and wajib. Do we eat healthy or do we eat unhealthy? This is a boundary that we can establish for ourselves. And if we don't maintain proper boundaries, then what happens is we can develop health issues later in life. Money. How are we with money? Do we hold on to it very tightly? Do we spend it frivolously? What is our relationship with money? Do we have any boundaries with respect to money? Time. What kind of boundaries have we set for time? Do we manage our time effectively? Do we set appropriate boundaries when necessary with respect to our time? Time is one of the most important things. Time is one of those things that when you lose, you can never get back. Money, you, one way or another, if you work for it, you try to regain it. But time is something that doesn't ever come back to you. Now I want to discuss a little bit about family. Boundaries can be tested when it comes to our family members. And of course, this also happened to the family of the Prophet as well. During the life of Imam Ali, when he was the ruler. As a ruler, he had control over the treasury. So one day, his brother Aqil came up. He said, "Oh, brother, I'm having some financial difficulties." Imam Ali responds, "Okay, sorry to hear that. How can I help?" And Aqil mentioned a certain amount. And Imam Ali said, "Well, that amount is high. I don't know. What I can do is after I've met my expenses, my family members, whatever's for me, I can give to you." And Aqil was like, "That's so small. That's not going to help." He was like, "Why don't you just get the money from the treasury?" Imam Ali said, "Well, what have you to do with the treasury?" And Aqil kept insisting. Imam Ali, according to some narration, said, "Okay, why don't we do this? One of these days, we'll go to the bazaar at a time when nobody's there, when people lock up their belongings. We'll go break those. And then you and I get the money." But he was like, "No, I don't want to do that. I'm stealing." And then Imam Ali said to him, "So what do you think you're asking me to do when it comes to this particular treasure? That's stealing as well." And then some reports state that Imam Ali took a hot piece of coal and brought it near Aqil. And Aqil involuntarily moved back because of the heat. And then Imam Ali said to him, "Aqil, you couldn't, for a few seconds, you couldn't withstand this heat of this coal. You're asking me to be able to withstand the hell of hellfire for what you're asking me to do for years?" And so here was an example of a boundary being tested. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Boundaries can also happen, for example, when it comes to parenting. You see, for example, some parents don't have any boundaries with their kids. They let them do whatever they want. They get them whatever they want. But what happens when they get older? They get a sense of entitlement. They run into all these other problems. And the type of parenting style that this is known as is permissive. And when they get into relationships later on in life, this also creates problems for them as well, because boundaries are not maintained. The ideal type of relationship is what's called authoritative, where there are healthy boundaries maintained. The things are very logically, lovingly explained to the children by their parents. Another common family boundary problem is with respect to in-laws. Now, the couple have to be very careful that their in-laws don't interfere in the relationship between a husband and wife. In fact, if you look at many marriages, particularly those where people come from an Eastern background, one of the leading causes of divorce is the interference of the third party, usually from an in-law. And so it's very important that the husband and the wife establish a type of boundary that they do not allow a third party to interfere in their relationship. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad
Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Another example where we see issue of boundaries at play, particularly for our younger population, is in school. One of the most dangerous things that happens in school is peer pressure, the need to fit in. This is how, for example, people get into drugs or smoking and things like that, because of the negative influence that people feel. And this is important where we teach our children, and of course we educate ourselves on maintaining healthy and proper boundaries so that we don't become victims to negative peer pressure. As I alluded earlier, when it comes to work, it's important that boundaries are maintained. And boundaries go both ways when it comes to the workplace. As an employee, you have certain expectations from your supervisor when you agree to take a position that you have a responsibility to fulfill. At the same time, when they take you for granted, or they're asking you to go beyond what you're supposed to do and you're not getting compensated for it, that is also an issue where boundaries come into place. Now, some of these boundaries I've been talking about have been boundaries with respect to interaction between individuals, families, but there's also community type boundaries. Now, what do I mean? Communities can go to extremes. They can go to either become isolationists, or they can completely assimilate. I want to give an example of a story that some of you may be familiar with, particularly if anybody is here from the Caribbean. There's a story of a festival that goes on in the Caribbean known as Jose Day. So the Jose Day, what they do, it's a Caribbean festival. They go and they have different buildings, they put them in the water, and they have what, those of you who are familiar with Caribbean festivals do, what typically happens in Caribbean festivals. What many people are not aware of is its history. If you ask, for example, many people about this event, they will say, oh, well, it's two brothers who fought, Hassan and Hussein, which of course, most of us know that's not correct. The origin of this day is when immigrants came to the Caribbean, they remember the day of Abu al-Hussein. But the problem was, over generations, instead of maintaining the core values, what Imam Hussein Islam represented, it devolved into a Caribbean festival where many things you could think of that are the opposite of what Imam Hussein would have wanted to occur. And so it's very important that we be very cognizant of what our values are and why we do so. And the complete opposite are those who are complete isolationists. We have people who don't want anything to do with the society and become very kind of ingrained in their own world, so to speak. You find, for example, Imam Salih saying that it's important to dress in accordance with your society. When we look at the example of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam. The Prophet dressed in accordance with his society. And so there's this balance that's maintained. You see, this is a thing, there's another thing about boundaries is that there has to be a type of balance. Another example of boundaries from a collective sense, the community sense, is unity versus uniformity. You find many people, for example, in the Shia community who get opposed to this concept of unity because they mistake it for uniformity. And Islam in no way, shape, or form advocates uniformity. It does advocate unity. And so let's give an example of how we can distinguish between unity and uniformity. You have, for example, Muslims of different schools of thought praying. Uniformity would be everybody praying the same exact way, regardless of their school of thought, regardless of what in their particular school of thought they think is correct. Unity, on the other hand, would be people praying together in what they believe is the correct, according to their jurisprudence or their beliefs, is the correct way to pray. And so here we see a distinction between unity and uniformity. Again, we go back to this concept of boundaries. Now, how do we get support for boundaries, either for ourselves or for community members at large as a community? Number one, it's important to reach out to other community members and get support from well-meaning individuals. Number two, for those who struggle with boundaries on an individual level, things like assertiveness training and just seeking therapy can help with respect to your boundaries. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, if you know yourself, you know your Lord. Knowing oneself and their strengths and weaknesses can help assess what your particular boundaries are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given each one of us unique and innate gifts. It's important for us to each discover that and use that in His service. And finally, when somebody makes a request of us, and it's something that we don't wish to do, it violates a boundary or something that we're not comfortable doing, we can always politely decline. But the key is to be respectful in our decline, where empathy should always be maintained. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So these last nights, for more than a week, we've been remembering the sacrifices of Imam Hussein, his companions, and his relatives. And these are all individuals who knew what boundaries were about and who knew what haqq was, who were able to distinguish haqq. These are individuals who are willing to give their lives up for the cause of Islam. One of the individuals that we talk about tonight is none other than Abu Fadl Abbas. Abu Fadl Abbas was a brother of Imam Hussein, and his mother was al-Bani. It is said that years after the deaths of Abu Fadl Abbas and Imam Hussein, the mother al-Bani would recite such powerful poetry, Jannat al-Baqi, that even one of the most hated enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, would come to hear her lament of her poetry, and he would break down in tears. This is how powerful her poetry was at that time. So Abu Fadl Abbas was like the right hand of Imam Hussein. And as I had met, no reprieve was given for Imam Hussein, and there was no way out. There was only fighting involved. One of the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, Shimr, Lanatullah alayh, called for Abbas and his brothers. Where are my nephews? They weren't interested in listening to him. But Imam Hussein said this, he may be a bad person. We should go hear what he has to say. And so Abbas and his brothers went to him and said, what do you want? He said, oh, my nephews, I can get you safe passage. See, the only reason Shimr cared even about them was that al-Bani was from the same tribe as Shimr. And so when Al-Abbas heard this, he said, you offer us sanctuary, but you don't offer the grandson of the Prophet sanctuary? And so then he rebuked his offer, and Shimr angrily went away. It is said later on, Al-Abbas went towards the Euphrates. He was known as a water carrier. He proceeded towards the Euphrates River, where he fought bravely, wanted to get water for his master Imam Hussein, but the enemies would not allow it. And though he fought bravely, these cowards cut off his arms. And finally he died very close to the bank of the Euphrates. If you go for his ziyarah, you'll notice that his shrine is away from the other shuhada. His shrine is closest to the bank of the Euphrates. It is said that this Abu Fadl Abbas was Qamar Bani Hashim, the moon of the Bani Hashim, because of the certain kind of beauty he possessed. And when he died, Imam Hussein's pain union balance. But the one thing that give the Imam Hussein consolation is that we will be joining his brother soon. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sallallahu Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allah Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Thank you, Syed Mansoor, for your inspiring Muharram lecture for tonight. Now, let us welcome Brother Abdul Rahim to recite a Noha Matam during these 10 nights of Muharram program with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بالحسين عليه السلام. May Allah increase our and your rewards for mourning the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. 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 Children cry in thirst, where is my Abbas? Abbas cries in pain. Children, I've been slain. I can't bring water for you, Ruqayya. I can't bring you water for you, Ruqayya. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. 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 Cries of Al-Attash, but I am Abbas. I will bring water for Hussein's daughter. What they've ambushed me, Master, forgive me. But they've ambushed me, Master, forgive me. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. 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 He won't quench his thirst, for Hussein comes first. With his arms cut off, still won't taste a drop. Blinded by arrow, I cry in sorrow. Blinded by arrow, I cry in sorrow. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. 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 Women and children were slapped and beaten. Children cry in fear. Zainab full of tears. Oh, my brother dear, I wish you were here. Oh, my brother dear, I wish you were here. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. 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 Saviors of Islam, I send my salam upon you, Master. When I drink water, all my love for you and my life for you. All my love for you and my life for you. I will beat my chest, I will never rest. I will give my life, I will sacrifice. In my life always, your flag raised it high. Hussein, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Hussein, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Hussein, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Hussein, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla, Ya Mawla. Abbas flag bearer, flag bearer, flag bearer. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad ma'jurin.
Thank you, Brother Abdul Rahim, for reciting this heartfelt Noah. and leading us in Matam for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. I would also like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thank all of you for your blessed participation in this year's Masjid Al-Rasul Houston Muharram program. I pray that during these 10 special nights, we will continue to learn new lessons from the events of Karbala, and it will help us enhance our spiritual connections with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very briefly, before we close with Ziyarat, I would like to invite all of you to our weekly programs. On Thursdays, we have a weekly Dual Camille in English program via Zoom at 9 p.m. Central Time. We also provide brothers the opportunity to sign up to recite Dual Camille in English. Look for that sign-up sheet on Thursdays, provided as a link in the Zoom chat. On Fridays, we perform the Jummah prayer at Masjid Al-Rasul in the 5th Ward, Houston, Texas, at 1:30 p.m., led by Syed Mansoor Ali Rizvi. We also have our monthly share meal program where we share a cooked meal with the local community members of the 5th Ward. We would also like to invite you to our monthly cemetery program at Paradise Cemetery, where we pray for the deceased mu'mineen, sweep the grave sites, and apply incense and Zamzam water for the graves. The sisters also have a weekly spiritual growth program on Sundays. We will also have periodic celebrations and commemoration programs at Masjid Al-Rasul 5th Ward, Houston, Texas, which we will announce via email as these programs are planned. Our next program at Masjid Al-Rasul is scheduled for August 27th, a monthly family dinner circle where we discuss various topics as a community. Finally, we ask all our brothers and sisters to support the Masjid Al-Rasul Muharram 2022 program on Zoom by donating as little as $20 or more to help us maintain the masjid and our programs. Please click on the corresponding night and choose from the amounts listed. We also have been blessed with the authorization of Ayatollah Sistani to receive combs from the mu'mineen. We are authorized to utilize half of the Imam combs for Masjid Al-Rasul, 5th Ward, Houston, Texas. I will leave the sponsor a Muharram Night PayPal link and Combs donation link in the chat and give you a couple of minutes to utilize the link before we close with Ziyarat.
We are on our way to you, Ya Hussein. We want to see your dome soon. We are on our way to you, Ya Hussein. We want to see your dome soon. Walking upon the angel's wings, leaving behind our everything. 75 kilometers on our way to the King of Kings. The air is filled with so much love. The stars shine on as from above. This is our call to everyone. Raise up your hands and say as one, Labbaik ya Hussein. We are on our way to you, Ya Hussein. We want to see your dome soon. From the moment that we were born, our parents showed us how to mourn, beating our chests, crying in grief. For Karbala, our hearts are torn. Our dream is to visit your shrine and to return time after time. This is a call to everyone. Raise up your hands and say as one, Labbaik ya Hussein. We are on our way to you, Ya Hussein. We want to see your domes.
Let's now close with ziyarat.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك منا سلام الله أبدا ما بقينا وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد منا لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله يا فاطمة الزهراء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا حسن بن علي المجتبى ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. السلام على التسعة الأئمة من ذريتك. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا حجة ابن الحسن المهدي. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على
Muhammad wa ali.
Muhammad.
Again, thank you so much for joining us in the Masjid Al-Rasul's 10 Nights of Muharram program. And we pray these auspicious nights help us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This now ends the program for tonight. And let me remind you that we will be here, inshallah, every night for 10 consecutive nights at 9 p.m. Central Time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.